I think, like most people growing up when I did in the 50s and 60s, if there was ever a question about God and politics in the New Testament, one instinctively went to a couple of places, Jesus saying, render unto Caesar and render unto God, and then Paul saying in Romans 13, the powers that be are ordained by God. And we just kind of left it at that. Oh, well, the New Testament is basically politically pretty quiet and just says, there's the state, but we've got something totally different to worry about. Now everything is very different, and people have suddenly, over the last decade, which is actually quite sudden in terms of theology, people have started wrestling with passages in Paul particularly, which actually seem to be very, very subversive in terms of what was going on at the time. We have to recognize, apart from anything else, that the Caesar cult, that is the worship of Caesar as if he was a god, was the fastest growing religion in Paul's world, so that new temples were going up. In some towns, they would knock down all sorts of buildings and create a new town centre to draw the eye to the temple of either Caesar or some member of his family. Because, of course, if you're establishing an empire, you can have thousands of soldiers running it, but it's actually a good way of short-circuiting that, saving a bit of money, if you say, well, our emperor is actually divine, so you have to worship him, which means you do what you're told, you pay the taxes, and life is easier that way. And because in the ancient Near East, an awful lot of cultures, ever since Alexander the Great particularly, had worshipped their rulers. This wasn't a big surprise, and if anyone said, well, how do we know Caesar is divine? The answer is, well, look at what he's done. He's brought peace to the whole world. We now enjoy a time of plenty and prosperity, and we have this new thing called justice, which the Romans claimed had come to become a goddess at the same time as Augustus Caesar had become emperor, just around the time that Jesus was being born, interestingly. And when you look at that rhetoric, that language of empire which is going on, and when you think of the way that they spoke of the emperor as the son of God, Augustus divinized his predecessor Julius Caesar, and so since he was his adopted son, he was the son of God, which is pretty strong stuff. And when you see the way in which Caesar's rule is spoken of as good news, we have this good news that we have a new emperor and he's the son of God and he's the Lord of the world and he's brought justice and peace to the world, you realize that actually, to look no further, the first paragraph of the letter to the Romans of all people, is very much in your face. Here's the real good news. It's about Jesus, and he's the Son of God, and he has all power, and he is the Lord of the world, and he demands your believing allegiance, your obedience of faith. And through him we have justice, salvation, freedom, and peace. All the things that Caesar claimed to give you. So we kind of rub our eyes and say, my goodness, so what then is going on in Romans 13? And the answer is, this isn't Paul's theology of the state, as we've often imagined. This is a way of saying, listen, where we are at the moment is in this interesting interval period between Jesus being enthroned as Lord through his resurrection and ascension, and the day which is still to come when at his name every knee shall bow, as in Philippians 2. How are you going to navigate and negotiate that in the meantime? And here's a very interesting thing which different theologians have wrestled with, but this is where I think it comes out. God wants to put the world to rights. God wants the whole thing to be sorted out. That's what Psalms 96 and 98 and all that are all about. The whole creation is going to sing for joy because God is coming to judge, means to put to rights the whole world. Now, the task of rulers in the providence of God, this is in Colossians 1 as well as elsewhere, the task of rulers is in a measure to anticipate that, because God does not want the world to collapse into chaos and anarchy. We often think when we're faced with tyranny that anarchy sounds rather nice until suddenly somebody steals your car or breaks in through your back window, and then you want there to be a police force, you want there to be courts that will sort it out. As far as Paul is concerned, the present role of Caesar is paradoxically a God-given role, not because Caesar is actually divine. He certainly isn't. Paul demotes him. He says, you've been instituted by God, you're not God, which is a big step down for Caesar, because God wants the world to be ordered, otherwise the bullies and the bad people simply get away with it. But that is the penultimate order against the day when finally Jesus will be visibly and clearly Lord of all. And so in Romans 15, which is actually one of the great climaxes of the letter, he quotes from Isaiah 11 that the root of Jesse shall come the one who rises to rule the nations, and in him the nations will hope. And if Caesar were ever to read that in a letter to Rome, of all places, he would know perfectly well what was going on. So my view is that we have to factor this whole way of reading Paul into all the other ways that we've read Paul. Some people get all silly at this point and say, oh, so Paul is writing about politics, therefore he's not writing about theology. That's ridiculous. We have to integrate it. And one of the exciting tasks, I think, for the next generation is to see how all of this that I've been talking about goes very, very closely with all the traditional things that we've always talked about with Paul, justification by faith, Christology, the atonement, etc., etc. Because as far as Paul's concerned, it all belongs together. And we have to struggle because of our culture, which has pulled the thing apart, to see how to put back together what should never have been separated in the